A lot of times during the interview, in addition to soft skill questions, managers are being asked technical questions as well. In this video, I'm going to share with you typical technical questions being asked during manager and supervisor interviews. Typically, technical questions for managers and supervisors focus on your skills in understanding of how to manage income and expenses using Microsoft Excel, import financial data for analysis into Excel, and also development of some procurement approval processes for subordinates using Microsoft Visio. In this video, we will start by looking how you can create procurement process for your team and communicate it using Microsoft Visio. Then we will look at how you can create income and expense report. And then we will focus on the key functionality in Excel that you might need to know as a manager or supervisor. A lot of times as a manager or supervisor, you might be required to develop or communicate an approval process for your subordinates. In this section of the video, let's look at how to do it in Microsoft Visio. Main objective for procurement request approval process is to document how organization purchases items from external providers. It starts with the requester documenting the business need, submitting the request, and supervisor reviewing the request. If supervisor approves the request, requester creates the purchase order and procurement department completes the purchase. If supervisor decides not to approve the request, then it ends here. But sometimes supervisor may also need additional information. And then it goes back to requester documenting the business need and following the process again. To create procurement process approval workflow, we will use Business Process Management Notation, BPMN. So we will search for the template for BPMN diagram. And once template is created, we'll start by creation of the swim lane. So I selected the swim lane in the list of stencils in Visio and added a new swim lane for the requester. As a first step, we will bring in the start symbol into the diagram and we will call it as start. Next step, as you can see, Visio allows us to use this triangle to add additional shapes, and we will add an activity shape and we will call it submit request. As I develop diagram, I might recall some additional details that I would like to add. So I'm going to zoom in using the zooming feature inside Visio, and I am going to add an additional step before submitting the request, which would be document business need. So to do that, I will drag this shape a little bit to the right, copy and paste this shape. I'm going to enable the home ribbon and select this shape and click copy. Then I'm going to click paste, which will create a replica of this shape. And then I'm going to drag it right on the line, and Visio automatically inserted it in between start and submit request. I am going to call this shape document business need. Next step would be for manager or direct supervisor to approve this request. To reflect this in the diagram, I'm going to drag another swim lane here and connect it to existing swim lane. Couple things happen here. Now Visio determined that we have multi-swim lane diagram, so it added a title. So we can call our diagram Procurement Request Approval Process. To do that, I'm going to type Untitled and type Procurement Request Approval Process. And I was adding the supervisor swim lane, so I'm going to rename this as well. Once request is submitted, the next step is for supervisor to review the request. To do that, I am going to click on the triangle and add an activity in supervisor swim lane. So first step is to review the request. Next step, supervisor needs to make a decision, approve or deny request. To do that, we will add a diamond here on the diagram. And here we will say approve, question mark, to indicate that this is a decision point. There are at least two outputs from the approval decision. The first output is when we will say, yes, I will approve the decision. And this means that we will add an additional task back to the requester. For example, the task might be create purchase order, PO. If supervisor makes a decision not to approve the request, then this will end the process. So we will type end here. There is also an additional possibility. Supervisor may need more information. To reflect that, we will click the connector and we will draw a line from Approve Decision box back to the Document Business Need. And we will call it More Information Needed. To do that, we'll switch back to the pointer tool, double-click on the line, and we'll type more information needed. It probably makes sense to expand the swim lane a little bit to allow for more room. Now let's continue our procurement request approval process in Visio. To do that, we need to add an additional swim lane for procurement department. I added and dragged the additional swim lane, and now I'm going to call it procurement. Next step in the process would be to add additional activity box, and we will call it complete purchase. By default, the box was created in the requester swim lane. We are going to drag it into the procurement swim lane. And it makes sense to change how the line is connected so the lines are not crossing. Since this is the last step in the process, we will complete it with the and symbol. Let's make our diagram look a little bit prettier. To do that, let's navigate to the Design tab, and there are a lot of themes options we can choose from. So you can choose the theme option that's most appealing for you. You can also choose from the list of variants for the particular theme. Very often, you might be asked, how would you create budget in Microsoft Excel when data for the projected budget is provided in Microsoft Excel tables format? To calculate budget with Excel tables, let's first look at the data. We have Excel spreadsheet with the imports from ERP system, Enterprise Resource Planning, and it contains 3 tabs. We're looking at Company Operating Expenses tab, which has 3 columns: operating expenses, estimated, and actuals. We also have company personnel expenses, and they're structured in a very similar way. They have expense categories, estimated, and then actuals. And then we have company's revenue, which is a revenue category, and then estimated and actuals. Couple considerations and definitions here. Budget is typically consists of the variance between estimated value, which was estimated ahead of time, and the actual, which was actually spent and tracked. So typically the reason to reconcile budget is when we want to look how well we estimated and how well our actuals actually match estimated values. Another big consideration here, all values here are positive, even though revenues typically adds to the company's value and expenses typically considered to be negative. So ideally what we should do, we should look at having revenue as a positive sign values and personal expenses and operating expenses being the negative sign values. Because data in all 3 tabs comes as Excel ranges, first step we need to do is convert all the data into Excel table. To do that, let's select all the data in the first step, company operating expenses, and you can do conversion in multiple ways. You can click Insert Table, and it confirms the range that we want to convert, and we say yes, and it converted it into a table. Let's do the same thing for other tabs, and now let's do a different way. I'm going to use shortcut Control-T, and it prompts me with the same confirmation box, and conversion is complete. And let's do exactly the same thing for the revenues, company's revenue. So we selected the range and click Table, Convert to Table, and now we have all 3 items converted into Excel table. As you can see, these tables do not have total values. So for tables, it's easy to add this. You just need to select the table, go into Table Design on the menu, and click Add Total Row. And we need to do it for all the values here. You see the table uses subtotal, and 109 is the sum formula. So we can copy this value. To do that, we can just do copy and then paste it here. And now we have both totals. With Excel tables, it does not support relative references as it does with ranges. So what we have in the formula, we're still referencing total from the actual column. So we need to change it and refer to it as estimated. And Excel provides us with some options. And now we clicked on this, and now we have recalculated value for estimated. We need to do the same thing for personal expenses and operating expenses. So let's go to first company personnel expenses. Then we'll navigate to Table Design and add a total row. And we would need to do the same thing here. We can either retype it, or we can use Control-C on the keyboard. That's what I'm going to do, Control-V. And we need to change it to estimated. So now we have calculations for personal expenses, and let's add total row for company operating expenses now. And let's copy and paste values and replace actual with estimated. To calculate actual budget, we need to get the summary of total values from each one of these tabs into the new tab. So I'm going to create a new tab, and I'll set it up with 3 columns: description, estimated, and actual. To operate effectively, we need to give each one of the tables we created a name. So for example, if we go to table design, the name for company revenue, let's use the same name as the name of the tab. So we called it company revenue. We will call company personnel expenses as the table with the same name. And we will give the third table name company operating expenses. I'm going to keep the names of all 3 tables in Notepad to have them handy, and I'll show you why in a second. One of the things that Excel allows you to do when you use Excel tables is that you don't have to necessarily reference tab by name. Table name is valid across all Excel spreadsheets, and you can just reference it in your calculations, and that's one huge advantage of using Excel tables. In the summary table, I added 3 rows: revenue, personal expenses, and operating expenses. Now let's bring in the data from company revenue. To do that, I'm going to use the name of the table, and that's all I need. I can just say equals, and then this is the name of the table. Open double square brackets, and Excel recognizes that this is the table that we already have in another tab. You just need to know that it's somewhere in the spreadsheet. You don't necessarily need to reference tab by name. And then here, what we would like to do, we would like to ensure that we're getting totals. So pound all brings all the data, and you can reference all the data. In our case, we're only interested in totals. So let's reference totals here. Close first square bracket, and then use comma and open second square bracket. And we're interested for column B in the estimated values. And I'm going to close both square brackets and hit enter and expand it a little bit, and the amount is for revenue estimated as $734,290. Let's verify that. We go back to company revenue, and the amount matches exactly. Now let's do the same thing for other relevant categories of revenue and personnel expenses. Last step in creating a budget is understanding the totals. Right now, we can just add the sum functions and do AutoSum for these 3 rows, but it's not going to be accurate, because what we need to account for is the fact that revenue is a positive amount, and typically expenses represented as a negative amount. So first step to do is to change the sign on expenses. To do that, we need to select an expense and add a minus sign, and then make it negative for all the expenses. Once this is done, we can add the sum formula. Now let's do some minor tweaks. We can name the tab as budget, and we can add formatting to this table. We can choose one of the many styles available in Excel. We can also add total here as the calculated value for row 5. You might want to consider changing the header row to use a different color. Now let's look at the budget itself. It looks like the estimated value was estimated as negative between revenue and operating expenses. And the actual actually was positive, so which means that we've earned more money than we spend. Here we've estimated that we spend more than we earn. So it turned out positive, and that's basically the conclusion we can come out with by looking at all these numbers from the company revenue, personal expenses, and operating expenses that we started with. Now let's look at another technical question you might be asked, specifically how to import financial data into Microsoft Excel for managerial analysis. A lot of times you might be asked the question on how to import transactional data into Microsoft Excel. Excel provides multiple different ways to import data. But first, before importing the data, you need to understand the data itself and how it's structured. Let's look at the 2 simple data files provided in File Explorer. First file, sales.transactions.txt, is a simple text file. If we open this file in Notepad, we can see that it has a headers and it has multiple columns. And this file is tab delimited. There are a lot of different formats Excel supports for import. The most popular file formats are comma delimited and tab delimited formats. Other import formats include XML, HTML, and PDF. Tab delimited means that between the columns there is a tab symbol. So between, for example, Germany and EUR, there is only one tab. So when you push tab on the keyboard, you can replicate this symbol. The importance of delimiter or a separator is essential because you would need to pick the format of how the source file is structured when you're importing the data. Typically, tab delimited files have extension txt, and typically comma delimited files have an extension CSV, which stands for comma separated values. To actually import transactional data into Excel, you need to click on the file and then click Open and click Browse to better understand where your files are located. And then you need to pick the right type of file. Here you can pick all the files, or you can pick specifically text files. Once I pick text file, I can see those two files I just demonstrated a second ago. We have a file with the extension txt, which is the tab delimited file, and if you click on this file, you can see the preview. I can also click on the CSV file, which is a comma delimited file, and I can see the preview of that file. In my case, both files are the same, but in your case, it might be different. I would like to give you one tip. You can impress the interviewer if you say that in addition to just solving the challenge technically, you can also ask the source to provide the data in a different format, which might be easier to import in Microsoft Excel. To actually import the files, you need to double-click on the file, and Excel will launch the text import wizard. In the wizard, Excel automatically senses the type of data that exists in the file, but Excel cannot determine if there are headers. So in our case, we have headers in the file, and headers represent the first row of data which describes headers in the file. We need to check My Data Has Headers checkbox to account for headers. Once we do that, and we confirm that the file is delimited and not a fixed length file, which is in our case this file is delimited, we click Next, and then we determine what type of delimiter is used. Excel predetermined that this is a tab delimiter, which is correctly, because now you see the line between the columns, and you see first row is selected as a header row. And then we click Next again. Defining data types is an optional step. You do not necessarily have to do it. You can just click Finish and define it later in Excel. And this is what I'm going to do. Once I clicked Finish, you see that Excel imported all the data. Now my goal is to better understand the data and expand the columns so I can see all the data inside the file. Very frequently, you might be asked to demonstrate your knowledge of conditional formatting in Excel. Keep in mind that questions might be asked specifically related to conditional formatting, or they also could be asked as a business question. For example, you might be asked to highlight all transactions with negative profit margins. To do this, you would use conditional formatting feature in Microsoft Excel. For example, the question might be, how can you quickly highlight all transactions with negative profit in Excel? To do that, you need to better understand the data. To better understand the data, you need to understand the columns and the meaning of each column in the source data. For example, the data we're looking at is the transactional data, and it represents sales transactions for a company. Each line item here represents specific transaction, and the column O represents the profit for each of these transactions. If we scroll down, we will see that most of the values are positive, but there are some negative values here, which we would need to highlight through conditional formatting feature of Microsoft Excel. To highlight all transactions with negative profit, we first need to select the data. Once data is selected, on the Home tab, there is a conditional formatting feature, and in our case, we will be highlighting the cells, and we'll be highlighting cells with the values less than specific amount. Our specific amount is 0. By default, Excel calculated something else. So once I replace that value with 0, and then choose the type of color, I think light red fill with dark red text is a very good choice to highlight negative amounts. So we will use the default choice here, but there are other choices. You should keep it in mind. Sometimes question might ask to use specific color, and then click OK. It seems that nothing happened on the screen, but on the first page there are no transactions. But if we scroll down, then we see that transactions with the negative amount have been highlighted with the red. We can also, to emphasize this, that these are dollar amounts or amounts in other currency, we can select the column and then use the $ sign to make it clear that this is a negative profit. Very often, You might be asked to remove duplicates in Excel. Keep in mind that there are many variations of this question you might encounter. For example, you might be asked to remove blank rows, or you might be asked to use specific feature of Excel to remove duplicates. For example, you might be asked to use Power Query to remove duplicates and remove blank rows. To remove duplicates in Excel, you need to highlight all the rows in the target range, and then one of the easiest ways to navigate to the Data tab, and then there is a Remove Duplicates button here. When you click Remove Duplicates button, Excel looks at all the columns that's available in the range and provides you with the header information. So you need to understand your target data, and you need to understand how duplicates could occur. In my case, let's take a look at the range first to see what kind of duplicates we might encounter. Typically, transaction ID in any data provides unique value that should not be duplicated. So if we're looking for particular duplicates, it would be good to check if transaction ID has any duplicates. So how can we do it? One of the best tools to use is Conditional Formatting in the Home tab. To use it, you need to highlight all the columns and click Conditional Formatting. Conditional Formatting allows you to highlight duplicate values. So if we select Highlight Duplicate Values and click OK, you will see that we have coupled duplicate values in transaction ID. And if we scroll, we might encounter even more. As you can see, I have found 2 duplicate rows with transaction ID, which is the same value, in the rows 306 and 307. What's interesting though, as I scroll, I realize that some of the rows are blank, and we're not accounting for blank rows. We will come back to blanks, but for now, let's undo conditional formatting by using Undo button, and then let's go back and remove duplicates. To remove duplicates through the Data tab, you need to highlight all the data, which I did already, navigate to the Data, and click Remove Duplicates. Now I need to unselect all the columns and only select Transaction ID, and click OK. Excel indicated that it removed 5 duplicate values out of 702. Now let's look at the blank values, because sometimes you might be asked how to remove blank values. You see that blank values are still here, and there are different types of blank values. For example, we have the entire row, which might be blank, or we have a row that's populated with the data, but does not have transaction ID. This leads us to another opportunity how you can remove duplicates in Excel, which is using Power Query and using Excel tables. So first, to remove duplicates in this way, you need to convert all the data into Excel table. To convert data into Excel table, we need to highlight the entire range and then click Ctrl-T or use Insert Table combination. Sometimes you can just scroll if you have a small data set, and then you will find the end cell for the range. But a lot of times you might be presented as part of interview or assessment test with the large data set. Excel allows you to identify bottom right corner of a data range set. To do that, you need to use keyboard shortcut Control-Shift-N on the keyboard, and then Excel automatically highlights the entire range. Once it's highlighted, you can use Control-T shortcut to convert it to a table, or on the ribbon, use Insert Table. Excel prompts you if your table has headers, which in our case it does, and then we click OK. After conversion is complete, this brings us another possibility of removing duplicates. You see, we are in the Table Design ribbon tab right now, so all operations specific to the table are listed in this tab. So what we can do, we can put the cursor into any cells inside the table and click Remove Duplicates. So once we do that, and select doing this very similar way as we did with the previous way of doing it was just for the range, Excel will be able to remove duplicates. I'm not going to do it for the purposes of this video. To remove duplicates, let's select any cell, click Remove Duplicates, unselect everything, then select Transaction ID, and after that click OK. And you see that Excel found 9 duplicate values and identify 702 unique values. This method also did not remove blank rows. If we scroll, we see that the blank rows are still here. Now let's look at another way of removing duplicates, which is using Power Query. Power Query can use as a source data, either table or range. And as you can see, I have 2 different tabs here, so we can use either one. It works very similar. Let's use table with Power Query. To do that, we need to select any cell on the table, and then we need to know what the table name is. We only have one table in this spreadsheet, which is Table 1. To identify table name, you need to go into Table Design tab once table is selected and understand the name. Now let's use Power Query to process the data. To do that, let's navigate to the Data tab, and here you have Import Data, Get and Transform Data section in the ribbon, and we need to use from Table or Range. Once you click on this, it launches Power Query. If you're not familiar with Power Query, this is the tool that was designed to help you process complex data. It allows for very sophisticated manipulations with the data. What happened now, we see the content of our table or range, depending what you will choose, being populated here in the Power Query and ready for analysis and also for processing. The way Power Query works, it applies the steps to the transformed data, and then it allows you to get a new data set based on the transformation. So for example, we have two steps right now. First step is source. This is when we identify that our table will be used in Power Query. Second step is change data type. This is something that Power Query identified by itself because I did not select this step. You see the X mark, which means that you can remove this step if you want to, but you cannot remove the source, which will basically erase the first step. So source always remains there in applied steps. Let's go back to our original goal. And our goal was to remove duplicates and also remove blanks. This is how we will do it in Power Query. As part of transformation, Power Query allows you to do different actions with the data. For example, you can remove columns, you can keep rows, and you can remove rows. In our case, we need to focus on removing rows because this is what it means to remove the duplicates. If we click on Remove Rows, we have multiple options. One option is remove top rows, bottom rows, or alternative row, which is not what we're looking for, but we should be focusing on removing duplicates and then removing blank rows. To accomplish what we're trying to do, we need to do two steps and two processing operations. In the first one, we will click Remove Rows and click Remove Duplicates. And you see that Power Query added an additional step called Remove Duplicates. In the second step, we will do the same thing, but we'll remove blank rows. Now our processing is done, and we can close Power Query and load the processed data into the new tab in Microsoft Excel. To do that, let's click Close and Load, and you see that Excel created a new sheet, which is called Sheet 5 right now, which has all processed data from the Power Query. Sometimes you might be asked how to sort and filter data in Excel. Since data in Excel could be stored as table or as range, we will look at the both options and how to sort and filter it using both options in Microsoft Excel. Data could be sorted and filtered in Excel based on how it is stored in Microsoft Excel. Since data could be stored as a range or as a table, it will be processed differently. For example, to sort and filter data stored in the range, all you need to do is select the top row, assuming that you will have headers for the data range in the first row. And then all you need to do is click Sort and Filter and then add a filter. Once you edit a filter, you will have different options of how you would want to process the data. For example, what you can do, you can select Sort A to Z, Sort Z to A, Sort by color, and use a lot of different sorting and filtering options. You can apply this algorithm to any column as long as it has the header and as long as it has this drop-down, which is automatically added once you add a quick filter. If your data is stored as Excel table, which could be verified when you click on any cell, and if you see Table Design tab added, then it means your data is stored as a table. And typically you can navigate here and see the table name in this tab. When data is stored as a table, you automatically have the drop-down boxes for sorting and filtering added, and you can just use them inside Excel table to process the data and to do sorting and filtering. Thanks for watching. Hope you've learned something, and if this video made you smile, it means I did something right. I wanted to share with you that I've been unemployed myself many times in my career and know how stressful it is to look for a job. One of the most helpful things for me was maintaining positive outlook on things. I wanted to give you a boost of energy in your journey of job search and getting ready for the interview and assessment test. If you like this content, please give this video a thumbs up, share with your friends, and consider subscribing to this channel. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.